Скажите, как вы думаете, цель оправдывает цель?
Peter Pomerantsev is de zoon van 2 Russische dissidenten. Hij groeide op in Londen en keerde in de jaren 90 terug naar Moskou, om daar 10 jaar lang als producent voor de Russische televisie te werken. Hij is nu verbonden aan de London School of Economics, met als specialisatie de informatieoorlog en propaganda.
We came to the West hoping it would be normal, and it's become like Russia. Conspiracies, the lack of trust, this idea that facts don't matter. Yeah? All of these things were everywhere in Russian culture in the 90s and early 2000s, and have become institutionalized since then. And to see them suddenly in a lot of the West is, for somebody who knows Russia well, kind of like this weird sense of seeing something very familiar play out again.
We vragen Pomerantsev ons uit te leggen hoe het Kremlin onze blik probeert te sturen en te beïnvloeden.
President Putin, did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Да, я хотел, чтобы он выиграл.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
They think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server.
Pomerantsev werd in 2015 als deskundige gehoord door het Amerikaanse congres, dat zich zorgen maakt over deze Russische vorm van beïnvloeding.
Conspiracies happen when people don't trust the institutions around them, don't trust parliament, don't trust media. If everyone's lying to you, then there must be a shadowy hand. So the Kremlin is in this loop. It is pushing out more conspiracies to fan that audience. They are funding these parties. We know that the Kremlin is funding Jean-Marie Le Pen in France. These are not fringe parties. This is actually now becoming the mainstream. And this is very, very frightening.
Om te begrijpen hoe onze blik gestuurd wordt door het Kremlin, moeten we terug naar het begin van de jaren 2000, toen Poetin aan de macht kwam.
The Putin project starts in 98, 99. So it was already clear that this is a new type of regime. That they have a plan. And already in 2001, when I arrived there, I remember, I think this was literally the first month I arrived there. I remember going to parties and very clever businessmen saying that it's all over. The experiment with democracy is over. From now on, the KGB are back. So they knew that straight away. They knew that, and the dissidents knew that straight away. The old dissident started saying straight away, it's back. Whatever we thought we'd got rid of, it's back.
Een van de getrouwen uit Poetins naaste kring, documentairemaker Vitali Mansky, kreeg de opdracht Poetin van dichtbij te volgen. Overal waar Poetin ging, ging Mansky met zijn camera. Het leverde unieke beelden op. Jaren later ontvluchtte Mansky Rusland en nam het materiaal dat hij draaide met zich mee. Met deze beelden construeerde hij een nieuwe film, waarin hij een meedogenloze inkijk gaf in Poetins PR-machine.
Не припомню, чтобы пресса рассказывала о штабе кандидата Путина, при том, что это был самый большой штаб, в который по факту входили первые люди страны. И считаю важным их вам представить. Михаил Лесин, министр печати России и одновременно владелец крупнейшего рекламного агентства страны. В прямом и косвенном подчинении его министерства находились все телеканалы России, главный медийный инструмент действующей власти. Ксения Пономарева, бывший глава Первого канала телевидения России, заместитель руководителя предвыборного штаба, вскоре после избрания Путина ушла в оппозицию. Владислав Сурков, с 2000 по 2013 годы, занимая высокие посты, являлся главным идеологом Кремля.
Vladislav Surkov, een naam die we in het Westen zelden horen. Surkov bleek de spin in het web van die gesmeerde PR-machine van het Kremlin.
So Vladislav Surkov, he's a guy that kind of grew up in the late Soviet era, apparently already very, very sarcastic, very, very artistic, writing sort of this sarcastic poetry about the lack of meaning in life in the sort of 80s, I guess. comes to Moscow, hangs around the kind of bohemian scene in Moscow. A lot of people that I knew remember him from them. Tried to be a theatre director, studied theatre directing. Then kind of changed, I think, and did something sciencey or dropped out. You know, one of these kind of like rambunctious sort of youths, which weren't uncommon at the start of the 1990s because so much was changing in society. There was a lot of upheaval. But he sort of finds his feet in public relations, which was just a developing industry in Russia. It hadn't existed before. Been like, you know, in a way, the communists invented propaganda and advertising as we know it, but there'd been no PR industry. And so all these young guys went into it. And he made a name for himself as one of the top kind of PR guys in Russia in the early 1990s. And then I think around 96, he, like a lot of people in PR, gets involved in elections and he joins Putin campaigns.
Ook documentairemaker Vitaly Mansky herinnert zich hoe het Kremlin alle middelen inzette om de eerste verkiezingscampagne van Poetin voor het presidentschap te laten slagen.
У начала предвыборной кампании Путина есть день, час и даже минута. Это 8 сентября 1999 года, когда в 23 часа 59 минут ночи в спальном районе Москвы заложенными мешками с гексогеном был взорван жилой дом с его обитателями. А спустя 5 дней второй дом, а потом взрывы пошли по всей стране. Я хорошо помню, как в подъездах и на улицах городов стали появляться военные патрули. Страна стала погружаться в страх, а обыватель не без помощи медиа все громче стал призывать к сильной руке.
Door de onrust in het land en het daadkrachtige optreden van de toen nog presidentskandidaat steeg Poetins populariteit met sprongen.
Сразу оговорюсь. Я ни тогда, ни сейчас не могу поверить в причастность лично Путина к взрыву жилых домов. Но тот факт, что в Рязани была по случайности придана гласности попытка закладки в подвал жилого дома сотрудниками ФСБ мешков с таким же гексогеном, создавал фон для достаточно серьезных вопросов к власти.
Скажите, как вы думаете, цель оправдывает цель? Цель оправдывает?
Цель чья?
Вот их цель оправдывает цель.
Цель террористов?
Да.
Ну, разве можно это правда? Потому что человек в здравом рассудке, мне кажется, никогда не может решиться на подобный поступок. Взорвать дом с живыми людьми, ни в чем не повинными. Ночью. Абсолютно не. Мне в голове не укладывается. Невероятно. Нечеловеческая жестокость. Просто мы должны понять, что мы должны противоставить. Этому можно противопоставить только силу. Без этого нам не государство не сохранит. И людей не сохранит.
Juist door de speculaties over deze aanslagen te voeden, wordt het complotdenken bij de burgers opzettelijk aangewakkerd. Een methode die tegenwoordig nog steeds wordt ingezet.
The state was very weak. The Kremlin was very weak. In the mid-90s, the country was potentially on the verge of collapse. And they had to give a sense that the state was strong and the Kremlin was strong. And so they began, and they could do that through information, by just giving people the sense that the Kremlin was everywhere and in control, and just that the state was all around you and enveloping you and kind of unavoidable. That helped you believe that it was strong.
И на экране, и на улицах, но все было прямо шаг за шагом, потихонечку выстроено и нацелено на тот результат, к которому мы вроде сейчас подходим. Поэтому я вас всех хочу поблагодарить и поздравить. Это ваш успех.
And then when, after Putin becomes president, Vladislav Surkov, he gets this very strange sounding job, deputy head of the presidential administration, which on the paper means nothing. In practice, it was incredibly important. So he ends up becoming the person who controls what Russians would call all the software of society. So the hardware of society is military, oil, economics. Software is political parties, culture in the sense of religion, culture, NGOs, that whole sector. The software of society, he ends up controlling that. So in terms of controlling media, that became very direct after a while. So all the big television channels came under Kremlin control. So there would be meetings every Friday in his office where he would set the agenda, telling them what the main news lines need to be. There'd then be very precise instructions which were sent out. So that came under his control, but also political parties. Very famously, there was a photograph that he himself leaked from his office, where there was like 4 phones on his desk, each with the name of one of the main opposition parties, though everyone knew that these were opposition. The Kremlin controlled what they did. They had a little bit of space to maneuver in, but they were just told, what their lines were and what niche they were allowed to fill and what role they were allowed to play. But also grants for arts, and also leaving a space for a lot of very liberal arts. He was kind of seen as a patron for the avant-garde at the same time, but also kind of helping foster the youth movement, Nashi, which is a sort of openly proto-fascist movement, and saying, openly says we're modelled on the Hitler Jugend. And that was very funny because, on the one hand, he was sponsoring these liberal arts projects, which would have the presidential administration's name on them to really show the liberals, look, we're with you. We're letting you have this incredibly avant-garde theatre festival. At the same time, feeding up Nashi, creating them, directing them, and they were incentivized to attack liberal artists. They would burn avant-garde books on the Kremlin. So the idea was to own all the narratives, to have a hand in all the narratives. He called it managed democracy. So we have democracy, we have different opinions, but it's all managed, like a reality show. Governments, politicians lie all the time. There's nothing new in them lying. Deception is a part of politics, it's a part of warfare, certainly. I mean, the Trojan horse is the first great information warfare operation. The Soviets lied a lot in the Cold War. They had a whole program of disinformation called active measures, anticipating a lot of what we see today, which is planting conspiracies and different stories in the West to disrupt it. Saying, for example, that the CIA invented AIDS as a weapon. So that was a big story they pushed out to try to foster a lack of trust towards America. Spin forward, Putin, Crimea, interviewed on international TV, just looking into the camera and just lying and smiling, there are no Russian soldiers in Crimea.
Вопрос есть или нет у наших войск на Украине, говорим прямо и определенно. Российских войск на Украине нет.
And a little while afterwards, actually rewarding the soldiers who took part in it, and admitting they were. So he's not lying there. He's not being deceptive. He's saying, I don't care about facts. I don't care. If anything, he's provoking us to say, you're lying. So he can say, well, you lied too. You lied over Iraq. We're the same.
Are you saying this was not a Russian missile? This was not a Russian army missile?
Нет, конечно. Несколько версий, в том числе и версия ракеты украинской армии, самолеты и так далее. Но, повторяю, нет ничего, что внушало бы нам доверие в качестве окончательных выводов, и не будет такого без нашего полноценного участия в расследовании.
This whole generation, including what we know of Putin, even though he's more, there's more going on there, is deeply cynical. I mean, these are people who grew up, at the end of the Soviet Union, not really believing in the Soviet system, but still playing at it. Everybody was aware that the slogans were meaningless by that point. Then they kind of dress up as Democrats. Putin was a good Democrat in the 1990s. You listen to his interviews from the early 1990s when he's mayor of St. Petersburg. He comes out with all this kind of all these pro-democracy cliches about needing transparency. He's read some sort of manual, and then they become kind of like market authoritarians. Now they don't care about business either. Now they're some sort of orthodox communist collage of new imperialism, but it's not really imperialism because sometimes it becomes nationalism, but they're not really nationalists. They're constantly moving around and adapting and reimagining themselves. And that by its very nature is very ironic. If you're constantly, that's what really irony is. Irony is saying one thing, but always being above your own words. That is the ironic, semantically, that's what irony is. So just that action that they live in, that kind of emotional state they live in, is already very, very ironic. You never quite mean what you say.
So you're saying that Putin is acting as Putin also?
Oh, definitely. But with Putin, look, there's also the problem of somebody who's been in power so long, and I'm sure you get pretty messianic at one point. So I'm pretty sure someone like Putin will now believe that he saved Russia and that Russia will collapse without him.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
I mean, it's quite interesting seeing Western critics trying to find an ideology that fits these guys, and they just recreate themselves over and over and reinvent themselves. They're like Madonna. Remember how, that was the genius of Madonna? She was one thing, and then she'd completely reinvent herself and something else, and that's why she could keep on going. And everyone kind of admits that about Madonna. So Putin's a bit like that, and all these guys. And they're good at that, and they enjoy that. And that's why they're always ahead of the game. And we're going, oh, actually, they're ideologically this, and they're already doing a new album. What the Kremlin was very good at under Surkov was finding a different language to talk to different groups and seducing them in different ways or coercing them in different ways. The Kremlin is now very good at that internationally. So everything that I saw developed internally is now used externally as well.
In 2005 werd de geraffineerde propagandaoorlog van Rusland uitgebreid met een 24-uur nieuwszender, Russia Today. Met als doel de hele wereld het Russische perspectief op het nieuws te geven. De zender wordt geheel gefinancierd door het Kremlin en heeft inmiddels ook een kanaal dat speciaal gericht is op de Verenigde Staten.
The mission of RT is to go to the people, tell their side of the story.
I think RT is typically misunderstood because it is a foreign news network and it's tied to Russia.
The state of Florida agreed to pay $800,000.
Just because it might be funded by a foreign government doesn't mean what we're reporting isn't real, isn't true, because it is.
We'll be here in the South Korean...
What kind of entity is Russia Today?
So what kind of beast? Look, we have a lot of whistleblowers who've come forward who quite openly say, look, there were direct instructions around critical events about what to broadcast and what the message should be, and so on and so forth, around MH17, about events in Syria. So we have the evidence of whistleblowers. But then we also have, kind of much more importantly perhaps, the evidence of the heads of Russia Today, who quite openly say there's an information war on, our loyalties to the state. Some of them have been rewarded with medals for Putin. They frame themselves as a part of an information warfare world. Their argument, because they're trying to make quite a sophisticated argument, is that everyone's doing it. The BBC does it. We are in a world of information warfare, and it is their duty to fight back.
From the very beginning, only one version of what happened was considered by the West. That MH17 was shot down by separatists with a Buk surface-to-air missile launcher.
We remodeled the Buk system with our simulation tools, potential flight paths, and it is a plausible explanation that a Buk system could have brought down that aircraft.
What seems to be the journalistic kind of moral mission is exactly what we've always grown up with as being good. And like the opposite of what you'd expect from an authoritarian country, which is like, here is the truth. And it's almost like a satire in that sense. You could see this as a satire of Western journalism. And that's a lot of the Putin regime works on satire. You have human rights organizations, we'll create some. They're joke human rights organizations that the Kremlin creates, but we can do that too. And just through that, it's quite subtle, I think, the ultimate end is that, well, if the Brits do it, well, the Russians can do it, because people aren't stupid. Most people do understand it's Russia Today, and it's very biased. But they're like, well, this is so much like what we do, therefore it's probably all kind of the same thing. So in that satirical moment, satire is very good at evening out the playing field, and Putin does this over and over. He's very good at satire. This cliche phrase, post-truth, which I don't like very much, but has become, it was the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year, I think in 16 or 17, which sort of signifies I think it's meant to signify not just lying, but the sense that facts don't actually matter. That there's a kind of joy in saying facts don't matter. There's a sort of an enjoyment to it. But also that political construction and identity isn't around ideology and facts anymore. It's about something else. Actually, what happened in Russia in the 1990s and early 2000s was not an anomaly. It anticipated in the West, and actually not just in the West, the collapse of meaning. Because I think our meaning was very much based on being opposed to the Soviet Union, communism, our ideas of freedom, of free market. That all made sense as long as we had someone opposing us in a kind of, in a relationship of opposites. And now we're at the point where nothing as radical as the point that the Soviet Union went through, but now we're at the point where all our old kind of constructs have collapsed. And now a lot of the pathologies that we're going through, Russia went through in the 90s and 2000s. No, we still have courts, we still have a lot. I'm not saying the system is the same. No. I'm talking about the political, the meta-political culture, so to speak, the political permafrost, the ideas behind the institutions, which seems to be going in a certain direction, which is very, very, very disturbing. Where Russia adds to that, it plays on it. And Russia is also a sign of where it could end up.
But how do we get out of
yeah, how do we start? Look, there are a lot of ideas out there. A lot of people just say more democracy. More direct democracy. Parties have to actually reflect people. Media have to reflect people. So we might just have a realignment. We might just get a realignment. This would be the simplest thing. Parties start becoming more reflective of society. Media learns how to bring those different arguments together again, and we kind of restart that chain of representation, and we can all feel that we're part of very different opinions, but part of one shared political community. That's the happy end. So this is just a period of flux, and then when the next few years, it'll balance out again. That's the happy version. The unhappy version is that historically, when these fractures happen, and people just can't agree on not just facts, but language anymore. We can't agree on our language at the moment. We can't agree on what is the people's will, what's left, what's right, what's a nation.
It's a linguistic problem also.
It's a discursive problem. Yeah, we can't even agree what on earth, what the categories we operate in. So I think historically when that happens, the results can be pretty painful. Everything's being put in place. This polarization is putting a culture of othering in place where the enemy is inhuman. You don't debate with the enemy, you just have information war with them. Well, the moment it's information war, then doesn't it just become physical? It's what worries me more. It's not just politics and games. It's fundamentally we can't agree on the key concepts anymore. We can't agree what's good for the nation. We just can't. We don't actually have a language to talk to each other anymore. And then everything becomes information warfare. So we're not having a debate anymore. The other triad is trying to confuse us or disrupt us. We start using the Russian language, and then I think there's a real chance of danger. There's another economic collapse. There's a chance of scuffles, and then what happens? Then a Putin emerges, so says, "I will bring order," and they will have a Putin in every country. I don't know. That's the negative scenario. So it could just be a minor adjustment. New political parties, a new media which actually represents what people care about, and we have a new flourishing of democracy which is much closer to what people really care about. Or we have Putins everywhere. So one of those two, I guess.
The moon stood still on Blueberry Hill.